just talked before about you reckon you're losing a lot of grain off the front with the stripper.
Yep.
Do you want to just run through how you were measuring that?
It rained.
Okay. That's one way of doing it.
No, you could visually see it flicking out the front when you were driving.
Yeah.
We did have possibly 3 different operators in it over the season. You really, well, there's not much you can do other than this hood goes up and down.
Yeah.
So your heads are sort of about here.
Yeah.
It's quite a boring job. Like you just don't get to see that grain coming in. Like it's actually like it's just.
It's like mowing.
It's just like this is nobody's one-off harvest now. All of a sudden, it's just like really boring. But yeah, your heads. You try to aim, I think, for your heads to be about here roughly. So this sort of up and down. We have the whole machine quite low because the heads on the barley were. Obviously you want to get everything. The rotor underneath runs this way, so it just gets everything, and the head comes up through there and just flicks it off, and then throws it up into the top of the hood, over the back into the table auger, and then in.
It leaves the rackus, doesn't it, of the wheat head? Just rips the spikelets off. Does it rip the whole head off?
Well, the odd time you might get 1 or 2 bits left, but it generally takes everything.
Right.
The barley, normally takes most. It snaps it off. Well, in our environment, it does. Like I say, we were running this rotor. You can change from about 300 or 400 RPM up to about 800, I think, from memory. We were running it quite fast to try and, we tried all sorts of speeds. But yeah, they reckon it's low. Normally you just run this slow and adjust this, so you don't have a lot of things you can really do. Probably what I was saying, now going to 15 degrees and we'll harvest straight. We'll have, because I think the problem is, they talk about having 7.5-inch row spacing is ideal, so you got no gaps in your crop. So last year wasn't a brilliant year, so we had reasonably thin crops. So this year is another, with the 15-degree thing, the crop's going to be that way. We're going to be harvesting that way, so hopefully there's a wall, so the grain that hits it can't spew out the front, and it'll hit that, and then it'll grab it, and it'll keep pinging it in, so that may be a strategy. You definitely wouldn't want to be like 12-inch or 15-inch row spaces. You'd just be spraying stuff on the ground flat out, I reckon. So like your Planet barley, heaps of straws, it'll be ideal. Thin wheat crops are, I reckon I'd almost park this up and just go back to a tin front and just cut high.
What about capacity? Were you getting pretty big capacity?
It wasn't everyone was flat out last year because we didn't have much crop. But yeah, pretty much 14-15k an hour all day.
How many tonne an hour?
It wasn't huge because the tonnes just weren't there.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, the setup out the back's quite different because this basically does all your thrashing. You don't even need a rotor, to be honest. Like all you need is a separator. You just need the back end of it to separate. What's going in is all your flag leaf is basically just, you can imagine your flag cut into about 1,000 bits of string. It's a really different, so I think that's a challenge to get your barley out of that stringy stuff. There's bugger all coming out the back.
How do you go with knocking the whiskers off your barley? Not having anything to rub it on.
This does it all. What's going up the broad elevator is normally what your front 2 sections of your concave do. All you got to do is get the grain away from. So we went to round bar concaves. We tried the wires, but they just, as soon as it gets damp in the afternoon, the whole thing just, it's like string all coming through your concaves, and crack the doors open, and the whole concaves are just jam-packed solid. Nothing's coming through. So yeah, round bar concave's the only way to go. And I'm starting to use the round bars even with the normal fronts now, just seeing how effective they are with this. I'll imagine that, except don't do it in canola. You block it from front to back.
Sounds like a special personal experience.
It worked all right in the heat of the day. Soon as same thing, we had a harvest band, left the same setup from barley into canola. Went all right during the heat of the day. Had a harvest band, come back in with the sea breeze and plugged it within 5 minutes from front to back. But there was an 18-year-old driving it too, so.
It might have been going a bit quick.
Yeah, well, when it's beeping at you and the things are flashing, you'd better stop, not just keep going until it completely stops.
So, Peter, you probably, apart from looking on the ground with the front, you know, there was not a actual number you worked? You just went, shit, there's a lot of grain.
No, I didn't. I had the drop pans, and I didn't do it. Because, I think this year we will try and put trays out on the ground in front. And measure it before the header passes over to see what it's flicking, and then you have to run out and grab it before the header spreads.
There is another way of doing it, and I suppose so there's a low tech and a higher tech way of doing it. And the way we've done a few evaluations on stripper fronts over the years and compared them with draper fronts, and we're actually up at Omaday's place up here at Borden the other day, or a couple of years ago, and we this was the first year that they were using a stripper front up there.
O'Means.
Sorry?
O'Means.
O'Means, yep.
Yep. You said Omaday.
Oh, did I mean O'Means? Sorry. Getting my O's mixed up. So O'Means, and we basically threw down square of ply after the front had passed, and then of course the residue from the back of the machine goes over it, scrape that off, and then have a look down on the ground. And one of the problems with that is that you've got to get out there in the paddock beforehand, before the harvest has even gone over, and have a look at what losses you might have on the ground already, because you might have had some shattering or some shedding beforehand. So you've got to get or take stock of what that might be before the harvest operation even starts, and then you can deduct that from anything that might see off the front. But I agree with what you're saying, Peter. You know, our observation up there was that there was a fair bit of grain flicking out. We measured about 5% losses just off the front, excluding the back of the machine, and so there was opportunity to get that right. Now they were actually running at 15 degrees to the crops to try and keep that flow in, as you talk about, and I think that's important. I think the most important thing was setup, and we had actually the guy from Shelbourne was there fine tuning it and was driving it on the day. I think he was doing about 14 k's an hour, 15 k's an hour as well. So capacity wise, no argument. It absolutely was flying in. He was getting well over 60 tonne an hour, and then was fine tuning it after that. So, but you know, that with those losses in mind. So, you know, you've got to be able to get these things right. I suppose.
What did he get it to?
Sorry,
what did he get it down to, or was 5% in the bottom?
Well, 5 was as good as he got on the day. We went over to and that was with the guys from Shelbourne, you know, who were fine tuning it. We also did some testing over in the Riverina and some irrigated country over there, a lot heavier. And as you say, the heavier the crop, these things actually work a lot better. And they were sort of around 2-3% losses there. So it was varied. But we compared that against a draper, which was under 0.5% loss. So I'm just interested. Did anyone scratch around after the front's gone over and had a bit of a look at what's coming up? And what do you find? Where are you finding some losses off the front end?
Well,
so around the middle, where the belts transition on drapers.
We just find that if you just stop, like James can drive and lay out the tray, and then they will just stand there on the non-wind side, and as soon as you go over it, you just pull up, and then you just jump out and see what's in your tray.
Oh yeah, before the
spreaders go over.
The spreader goes over. Yeah,
if you do it smart enough in non-wind direction, it's easy.
And that should do most things. I think it's probably, as you say, if it's in the centre there, you just got to make sure you're not then putting the residue from the machine over the top. And in a lot of cases, the benefit of dropping that tray as we are off the rear axle, even just in normal operations, is that whatever's underneath that tray is going to give you an indication of what's happening with the front end losses.
You can do the same just off the front. So again, what you see underneath that tray is giving you an indicative. Now I use that word indicative because you've obviously got, as Ben's already said, what you're already shedding, but you give an idea of what's under there. And what Marcel, who's originated the Bushel Plus one, was doing was then looking at head sizes. What have I got? Whole heads there? What have I got? So you start to give you an indicative idea of what you've got.
And I mentioned the importance of that pre-harvest evaluation first, because sometimes you'll have whole heads on the ground, that might have already been there, nothing to do with the harvest operation at all. So that's the front. I suppose in terms of if there are some losses there, a couple of options for very light crops. Sometimes core flute. On the reel is a good option just to try and sweep material back in onto the front. There's duck feed, all sorts of options out there as well. Anyone using any of those things on the reel?
IBC containers.
Yeah.
This sounds like an IBC challenge.
I should have brought the other front over. That's still got them on from
I
doing
actually saw a
lanes.
couple in on the right hand side of the way, and they might be contenders as well. So so just give us a rundown on what you're doing with the IBCs. Just cutting them.
No, we just cut strips about a metre or out the side of IBCs.
Yep.
Got a hole saw, drilled 4 or 5 hole saw holes, and you just sort of clip them over the fingers, and then just cable tie the top of it to the thing, and we just set one here and then one up there and one there and one there, just to sweep the favour beans in a little bit better. Because
it doesn't need to be on every element of the reel. Just every what would you have on there?
I just got sick of doing it after a while, so that's enough.
I tend to get sick of doing it.
We should have had more. I think we've only got one on each.
One per set
One
per
per
rotation.
and then another one here. So
1 or 2 per rotation is pretty good. And they tell you to do them randomly because it can do your eyes in. Watching these things come in towards the centre all day, you get really tired watching that. So
Some people use gutter guard.
Yep.
And
that works well.
Yeah, meter strips and set up the same way.
Oh, the round brushy stuff.
No, it's just
It's a plastic
it
mesh.
comes in plastic mesh, like fly wire basically,
Yep.
but it's a bit stronger and just cable tie it to the reel. Exactly the same setup.
What crops are you using it on?
Oh, it was probably 2018, really light crops, and just helped it
Get it off the
mat.
knife.
Yeah, get it off the knife.
So gutter guard,
We actually use
IBC,
old draper matting,
draper matting. Yeah.
and then actually have it a bit longer so it actually hits the fingers. It can brush it right in.
Yeah.
We've used gutter guard in the past and find that it'll actually block up with stuff,
Okay.
and then you'll end up with that flicking effect
Yeah.
because you'll get, especially on your spray runs.
Yep.
We've tried using it there because your material will come along and then it'll hit your spray run.
Yep.
Because we're tram lining, and then everything would fall off in that area.
In that
tram line,
Yep.
so it'll just fall off the front.
Yep.
So tried to use gutter guard there, but in Bali they will hook on.
And that would just flick it around.
Yeah, and then you end up with this shit flicking everywhere. So a bit of draper matting so it can actually brush just the top of the fingers.
And you were saying just cut it a little bit longer so it actually can then bend and it'll
Hit
flick
your
back
fingers
into the
and
front.
flick it in and actually clean your cutter bar.
Yep.
And that worked really well.
I find politician signs work pretty well too.
Absolutely.
There's some Clive Palmer ones.
Problem is, you got to keep reading them. So
Yeah.
don't really want to do that.
You've got to graffiti their face before you.
There's a bit of those getting around the week from a couple of years back, wasn't it? Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Any questions on the front side of things?
I was saying, I tried those duck feed in the past 4, not here in New South Wales, but down there bad at hooking onto heads and throwing stuff around as well.
Yeah. So you didn't find them as effective,
Nah, it just makes a mess really. Chickpeas and even some
and they're pretty
cereals.
expensive, right?
Oh, we borrowed, didn't buy. Yeah, someone else had given up on them, so we had to go. But we gave up as well.
$7, $8, $8 each, I think.
Yeah. So it adds up.
So I might just address the ryegrass seed capture with these things now. So not disputing what you said, Peter, I think the difference is, as you said, you had green, and the research I'm going to quote was dry ryegrass. So New South Wales, it was Mike Walsh and John Broster who've done a lot of harvest weed seed control research and measurement, and they measured these things at Dan Fox's place. I don't know if you've seen Dan. He's a strip and disc guy as well. And the message is that they can be as effective as a draper. And so the trials they did, there was one particular trial they did where the draper and the stripper front ripped the same amount of ryegrass into the front as each other, and then another one where the draper was in front of the stripper front. And talking to Dan, he really thinks they're really good at ripping brome grass in, because brome you can hit with a knife and they can bend down and spring up, all of that. And he found that you can really rip brome in.
Wild oats, work good for wild oats as well. Those ones floating around.
Oh yeah.
Just the stem still there, whereas McDonald probably push that over and they could just pop straight back up like brome.
Yeah.
So they work good in the brome and the wild oats, but
But the green ryegrass heads thing and moist ryegrass heads is a problem for as you said, they can get stuck in the rotor. So you obviously noticed two things. One is that this wasn't grabbing the green heads, which makes sense. It's got to be brittle enough to snap it off, doesn't it? But the ones you did grab, a lot of them exit in the rotor, and that's been a problem for harvest weed seed control forever. A lot of people have told me they've been harvesting with their chaff cart, and they're going into the night, it's getting damp, and they eventually stop, come back and start harvesting again the next day, and then next year they've got this black and white, low ryegrass, high ryegrass in their paddock, because when they were going into the night, the ryegrass got tough, and the rotor just wasn't threshing the seeds out of the ryegrass seeds heads, and so they were exiting in the rotor as well. So that problem has been forever. I don't know if Brett's got any solutions to it. We might talk about that in a minute, but that's have you got any solutions to that, Brett? Or?
Well, it's not a real solution, but the challenge with it is that if you don't break that ryegrass seed up, you're not going to get it out of the cage. If it goes through in big pieces, it's just going to go through no matter what you do. So the key is thrash it hard, break it up. That's the only way you can do it. So, what Peter was experiencing, we had a bit of a chat early on about those big pieces of green head just going straight through. There's almost no solution for that. We'll get the same thing early on with these red headers with the AFX rotor or the specialty rotor in them. We were getting that way back in the 90s with them. And you'd get part heads come through in certain crop conditions, and no matter what you did, you couldn't get rid of them, which is why they started doing all sorts of things, making Gordon bars and Kyle bars and all these other things that we used to have to do.
So my only thought was those green sections and immature sections, would that then still be management because they might not finish, they might not be viable seed? Problem being, if you had cut it with a McDon, you physically cut everything off. Like Brett said, we cut quite low to the ground generally, so you're actually basically cutting your ryegrass for hay. Yeah, you might be distributing it out the back or into a chaff cart, but at least it's cut and it might not finish, so you've possibly got a bit of control there, whereas this is not even taken the green ones, and you go back later and all the ryegrasses all just keeps on growing, and you've almost got to come back with a boom spray pass after this to control your ice. I've almost thought, you need to just run a paraquat over your stubble basically, because this is not getting any of the ryegrass, well not any, but very little of the ryegrass, whereas at least with a McDon it's cutting it off, and maybe, I don't know, what's worse or what's better.
Well,
are you better off coming back with a paraquat, or are you better off, or is the stuff you cut with McDon actually viable and you've distributed it? So
it's probably viable. Like if you cut it and it was either flowering or maybe water ripe and you cut it, you'd probably stop a lot of seed set. But as soon as there's any dough in the seed, it's going to make viable seed. It's like swathing barley. You swath barley when it's got dough, it goes on to be a viable seed. It's the same sort of thing. So yeah, but is that pretty normal to have green ryegrass while you're harvesting mature?
Mainly barley,
cereals?
yeah. Like, because barley sometimes can be ready before canola.
Yeah.
Like I say, when we got to the wheat, it was probably different. Like later, like by the time we got to December, it was probably doing a different job.
Yeah.
But early on, in the barley.
So has crop topping barley with glyphosate been pretty common for you, or?
No, it hasn't. No. Well, we used to grow malt, but
right.
got rid of that pretty much.
You have to say we're definitely getting more and more late germinating ryegrass in the area. It's from, I guess, earlier sowing and using our pre-Ms early on.
Yeah.
In a lot of the back end germinations.
Yeah, so we know that that's a thing. We measured that with a few of the different grass weeds that we're getting more dormancy, later germinating. The genes for those things, later germinating, are really common. So the genes for herbicide resistance might be 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million, but the genes for later germinating might be 1 in 100, So it's really common, so it's really easy to select. And with our predictable farming system, seeding at about the same time, using the same sort of pre-Ms, we're just training the ryegrass and brome and barley grass. It's been measured for all of them, come up later. What I do always say about that though is it's late germinating weeds are always a symptom of a high seed bank. And so when I go to Ray Harrington's farm, who's been, I don't know how many years, 8 years of destructing and lots of swathing barley and really low seed bank, he doesn't have late germinating ryegrass because he just doesn't have any. And all of his neighbours all say, oh yeah, I can't beat ryegrass because it's so late germinating now, and sort of throw their hands up. Whereas Ray has beaten it, you know, like took a while, took a lot of effort, a lot of swathing barley, a lot of headaches, making destructors and things, but when you get your seed bank low enough, the late germinating weeds become less of an issue. All right, any more on fronts before we move around another section?
But late germinating ryegrass, you know, if you've got desiccation, there's a tool.
Yeah.
Usually you get them there.
Yeah, it's an opportunity, isn't it? So swathing, desiccation. I mean, you're saying if you got late germinating and then it's green in the barley, the harvest weed seed control isn't great, you know. So that's a challenge, but you've got to try and think of the other solutions. I know swathing's another practice, but that works. Yeah, not sure where we're at with the glyphosate permit in barley. That's out, isn't it, this year? Does anyone know better than I do?
What's actually happening? No, you can still do it this year. I'm not sure.
You can still do it this year. Yeah. Yeah.
So they're going to separate it and keep it and give you a dockage, or was it? That's what I haven't heard.
No, it's the same as last year. I thought.
Yeah, just had a permit.
I
Like
guess
the same permit got renewed.
Yeah, no, but are they going to deduct $20 a tonne like they were trying to do last year to go into the Chinese market that's now not there? So is there any point in deducting $20?
No.
I guess one thing that needs to be said though is from Peter's experience is that the stripper front isn't going to necessarily give you the bulk of material going through your machine. So you might be able to pluck that ryegrass off, but the machine hasn't got anything in it to be able to break any of that seed off, and it's just going to go straight through. So all you've done is reward it, picked it, and spread it a bit further. But if you were to go through and harvest conventionally with a belt or a tin front, you then at least have some bulk of material to go through there, and you're going to get more of that ryegrass. Then at least if you do get it to break up, get it to turn into seed, get it out of your rotor cage onto your field, you stand a chance of putting it through the mill and destroying it.
How much material was coming out of your rotor cage pipes?
Going over the sieves?
No, how much was coming out of your rotor? Like how much material?
So out the back of the rotor?
Yeah.
Bugger all.
Could you put the whole lot through the seed destructor?
Yeah, I'd almost thought of that.
With the seed destructor handle, the stripper front, and the setup that he's got to go through it, or would it be too much?
Probably would. But I can't quantify that because I haven't spent enough time with the HWSC to tell you.
When young Heathy blocked the big thing up, he did a lap and a half with the whole thing jammed full, and it was all going out to the destructor and just laid a yellow line out the paddock. We opened the plastics, and she was just packed. The whole thing was just full, and the mills never stopped. They took I don't know where it was going, but they took the whole bloody lot, and that was in canola. I said, didn't it beep at you? And he goes, oh, yeah. So why did you stop? He goes, oh, I was waiting for it to go away.
What the sample look
Then
like?
I found the belt on the lap before, and I was like, the bloody returns belt had been off for like a lap and a half, and I'm like, oh my god.
It was a good levers though, wasn't it?
Nah.
Was it straight up?
We'll say that though.
Would actually set it up to do that.
Yeah, the only thing we did have drums with at the start was I had the chopper on low speed because I thought nothing's going through it, those will not run it. But we had problems with
Exhausting the material.
it was sitting on the baffle at night time and falling backwards into the mill, and then it would be harvesting along, and all of a sudden there'd just this big crack of a noise. I was like, what the hell is that going on? We couldn't work out what was happening, so we were stopping at night time because the structures wouldn't handle nighttime harvesting. And so we got the guys out and they put tension up the belt more because we thought that was it. But when we got in there to blow it down in the morning, we found all this straw laying on the baffle divider. So we put the chopper back to high speed, threw it at the back wall, never missed a beat after that. So it needed And in that situation at night, damp conditions, and there was green barley, because we had a lot of just a shitty germination the year before. We had green barley and ripe barley, and we were probably in there too early, but we just had to go. And yeah, it definitely soaked with green material going through it.
Brett, a question for you is for the chaff decks, we put a roller on for the cases and John Deere's where they're dealing with green material or particularly GM and or moist wet conditions.
Yeah.
So is that something that's viable for that sort of thing?
It is. The challenge with any of these things, and particularly when you go and put a mill on or go and put your chaff deck on or whatever, is that segregation between your chaff fraction and your straw. You've got to keep them separate, but you also have to get the material out the back of the machine. And so adding a roller deck or a PSD like the New Hollands use is a good idea, except it's in the way. So if you do happen to haystack the thing, you got something else in the road that becomes a couple of hours work to get out of the way so you can unblock it. So that's the challenge. And perhaps Peter's right, you know, stripper front, take your back two concaves out and everything that comes out the rotor has to get on the sieve and then see if it works. Don't do it in your canola.
No, it didn't work.
Or an 18-year-old.
Your challenge that I do know from people who I've spoken to, your IHSD doesn't like green material.
No.
Okay?
We tried to do favour beans with wireweed and crap in it, just smoked it up straight away.
Don't
We had to
like it.
paraquat it and then come back a couple of days later and just blew through it then. But yeah. And
So
as
a
soon as you
seed
hit it with
terminator
green,
will eat it. It'll eat green material. You can poke green material through a terminator, no issue. But
Is that with the high capacity screen? Or
even the standard screens.
Yeah, right.
So they're running standard screens in Germany, and the paddock is green like your front lawn after they've gone through it. High capacity screens will handle a lot more green material, and it'll actually kill green weed seed. So if you get green ryegrass and you poke it through an IHSD, it'll come out still viable, largely, not all of it, but through the terminator it won't. It'll crush it because of the flail in it.
Is there a caveat on canola there?
In what way? Don't put green stalk through any of the mills.
Thanks, yeah, that's all.
Because if you're poking green stalk into the mill, it'll be the biggest horsepower thief you've ever seen. Same as any of the mills, if you're putting a large volume of straw through those mills, that thing hasn't got enough horsepower.
So we don't have anyone here from Redicott. Do you want to make a comment on the SCU in relation to handling?
Relation to in terms of mill performance and green material, they're all much the same as far as I'm concerned. So I think when it comes to canola, particularly, you need to think pretty carefully about what you're doing there. Stalks, as you say, just going to make a hell of a mess. Just like that crap that comes out of a juicer. If you ever used a juicer with veggies or whatever, or fruit, it's just that stringy stuff and it takes you forever to unblock it. It's not fun.
So there's a couple of good videos on YouTube. So Uni, Missouri, they've got a 8250 case with one of our mills on it. And you see the guy catching it in the big net, he's catching the material coming out. He goes and gets a handful of it, he wrings it out like this, and it's just wet, and that goes through the mill. And it kills that stuff. That's giant ragweed, which grows 14 feet tall in the US, and water hemp goes through the mill green and comes out 98% destroyed. So they'll handle a lot of green material. They won't handle green stalk. They're not designed to do that. So.
Righto, we'll get more to the mills.
Yeah.
Ian, let's we'll get to the mills in a minute, I reckon.